They called her a curse, a broken 6-year-old girl who left a trail of ashes where her family used to be. But 15 years later, she walked into a federal courtroom, looked the most feared syndicate on the East Coast in the eye, and proved the curse was real. Only this time, it belonged to them. The rain over Newark didn't fall. It drowned. It slicked the cracked asphalt of Mulberry Street and bled into the neon glow of the diner sign overhead. Inside the iron-bound diner, the air smelled of burnt coffee, grease, and the distinct, sharp tang of ozone from the storm outside. Arthur Vance didn't belong in a place like this. He sat in a corner booth, the vinyl cracking beneath his tailored charcoal suit. A 3-piece chiton that cost more than the Dineton's entire inventory for the month. To the world outside these fogged windows, he was Arthur, the ghost of the concrete jungle, the undisputed sovereign of the city's shipping docks and unions. He was a man who moved millions with a flick of his fountain pen and buried his mistakes under 6 feet of wet cement. But tonight, he was just a man staring into a lukewarm cup of black coffee, his knuckles white around the ceramic. He was 42 years old, and he was entirely, suffocatingly alone. His empire was fracturing from the inside. The rival syndicate, led by a ruthless bastard named Thomas Cole, was squeezing his supply lines. Arthur's own captains was whispering in dark alleys. The pressure was in physical weight, a tightening noose around his throat. He had everything: power, wealth, a name that made grown men tremble, yet his chest felt like a hollowed-out cavern. Every night he went home to an empty estate on Eagle Rock Avenue, a fortress built of cold marble and echoing silence. He was tired, so incredibly tired. The bell above the diner door jingled. A woman shuffled in, her movements heavy, beaten down by life. She wore a faded yellow raincoat and a pair of worn-out sneakers that squelched with every step. Clutched tightly in her hand was a little girl, no older than 6. The child was thin, her skin a pale, translucent porcelain under the harsh fluorescent lights. She wore an oversized sweater that swallowed her small frame, and her dark, wide eyes were fixed on the floor. "Just a coffee, please. And a glass of tap water," the woman told the weary waitress behind the counter. Her voice trembled. She didn't look at the menu. She couldn't afford it. Arthur watched them from his booth. He didn't know why, but he couldn't look away. He noticed the bruises on the woman's wrists, poorly hidden by the sleeves of her coat. He noticed the way she flinched when a truck rumbled past the diner outside. A single mother, desperate, running from something. Suddenly, the diner door burst open again. 2 men stepped inside. They didn't wear raincoats. They wore heavy leather jackets, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the woman. Arthur recognized the look in their eyes. It was the look of wolves finding a stray lamb. They were collection enforcers, the low-level scum who broke fingers for a living. "There you are, Sarah," the larger man growled, stepping toward the counter. "You thought you could skip town on what you owe Mr. Rossi $5,000, Sarah. With interest, it's 10. Now." The woman, Sarah, shielded the little girl behind her back. "I don't have it," she sobbed, her hands shaking violently. "Please give me until Monday. I have a job interview. Just until Monday." "We don't do Mondays," the man sneered, reaching out to grab her arm. Arthur didn't move. He didn't care about local loan sharks or desperate debtors. It wasn't his business. He started to look back down at his coffee, ready to let the world rot around him. Then, the little girl stepped out from behind her mother. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked up to the towering enforcer and wrapped her tiny, fragile hand around his thick, scarred index finger. She looked up at him with those massive, unnervingly calm eyes. "Please don't hurt my mommy," she whispered. Her voice was incredibly soft, yet it seemed to echo through the quiet diner. "If you do, the bad things will come for you." The enforcer laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Yeah, what bad things, brat?" He shoved the child away. It wasn't a violent throw, but it was enough to send her small body tumbling backward. Her head struck the sharp edge of a metal stool leg with a sickening, dull thud. A line of bright red blood began to trickle down her temple, stark against her pale skin. She didn't cry. She just sat on the linoleum floor, staring at the man. Something snapped inside Arthur. It wasn't logic. It wasn't a calculated move for power. It was a raw, primal roar from a part of his soul he thought he had buried decades ago. The image of the bleeding child cracked open the armor around his heart, revealing the bleeding, lonely boy he used to be before the streets forced him to become a monster. Arthur stood up. The silence that followed his movement was absolute. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He walked over to the enforcer, his steps slow and deliberate, the leather of his Oxfords clicking against the tile. The two thugs turned, their expressions shifting from arrogance to sudden, paralyzing terror as they recognized the face from the newspaper headlines and street legends. Mr. Vance," the large man stammered, his face draining of color. "We didn't know you were here. We were just—" Arthur didn't let him finish. He struck with the speed of a viper. His fist caught the man square in the jaw, a brutal, bone-shattering blow that sent him crashing through a nearby table. Splintered wood and broken glass scattered everywhere. The second thug reached for his waistband, but Arthur caught his wrist, twisting it until the bone popped with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. "Get out," Arthur said, his voice a low, terrifying whisper that vibrated in the small room. "If I ever see your faces in this city again, I will personally ensure you become part of the foundations of the new bridge on Route 21. Move," they didn't need to be told twice. The injured men scrambled out of the diner, leaving a trail of blood on the wet floor. Arthur turned back to the mother and child. Sarah was hyperventilating, clutching her chest, looking at Arthur with even more terror than she had looked at the loan sharks. She knew who he was. Everyone knew Arthur Vance. But the little girl was different. She had crawled over to Arthur's discarded suit jacket on the booth, picked up his linen handkerchief, and was pressing it to her own bleeding forehead. She looked up at him, and for the first time, a tiny, fragile smile appeared on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's her name?" 15 years passed like a fever dream. The scared, bleeding little girl from the iron-bound diner grew up behind the high stone walls of the Eagle Rock estate. Arthur kept his promise. He shielded her from the brutal reality of his world, yet he gave her everything. She went to the prestigious Kent Place School, driven by armed security in armored SUVs. She grew into a stunning, ethereal young woman, intelligent, fiercely independent, but holding a quiet intensity that mirrored her adoptive father's. She graduated top of her class from Seton Hall Law School, refusing to use the Vance name to secure her position. To the world, she was Mia Vance, the brilliant young legal mind. To Arthur, she was his entire universe, the only pure thing in a life built on sins. But the world Arthur built was starting to crumble. It was the summer of 2026. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, spearheaded by a relentless assistant U.S. attorney named Richard Avery, had spent 5 years building a massive RICO case against Arthur. They had wiretaps, financial records, and most devastatingly, a turncoat. Arthur's closest confidant and underboss, a man named Donald West, whom Arthur had trusted for 3 decades, had cut a deal with the feds. Donald was going to take the stand and expose every murder, every bribe, and every extortion scheme Arthur had ever authorized. The trial was set to take place at the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Courthouse in Newark. If convicted, the 61-year-old Arthur would spend the rest of his natural life in a supermax prison. The night before the trial began, Arthur sat in his private study, sipping a glass of Macallan 25. The room was dark, illuminated only by the dying embers of the fireplace. The stress had aged him. His hair was completely silver now, the lines on his face deeply etched. There was a soft knock on the door. Mia stepped inside. She wore a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her long dark hair tied back in a professional, elegant bun. She carried a thick leather briefcase. "You shouldn't be here, Mia," Arthur said gently, not looking up. "The feds are watching the house. If they see you associating with me right now, it could ruin your career before it even starts. You have a future. Don't let my past drag you down." Mia walked over and sat in the chair opposite him. She didn't look at him with fear or pity. Her eyes were calm, deep oceans of absolute resolve. "I am entering my appearance as your co-counsel tomorrow, Dad," she said flatly. Arthur froze. He set his glass down with a sharp click. "Absolutely not. Your lead attorney, Marcus Hale, is the best defense mind in the state. He handles the courtroom. You stay in the background. I will not have your name dragged through the mud." "Marcus Hale withdrew an hour ago," Mia replied, her voice steady, unyielding. "He received a call. His daughter's car was ran off the road in Alpine. She's fine, but the message was clear. Thomas Cole and Donald West are terrifying everyone. No lawyer in New Jersey will stand next to you tomorrow, Dad. They know you're a sinking ship." Arthur felt a cold dread wash over him. The noose was tightening. Cole had bought the lawyers, bought the witness, and secured the prosecution's victory. He looked at Mia, his hands beginning to shake. "Then I go in alone. I won't let them destroy you, Mia. Remember what people used to say about you. The curse. Look at what's happening. The feds, the betrayal. It's happening again." Mia reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to his icy fingers. "For 15 years you protected me from the curse," she said softly, looking directly into his eyes. "You told me it wasn't real. But you were wrong, Dad. It is real. I've felt it my whole life. A dark, heavy thing waiting in the shadows. But I finally figured out why it's there. It didn't follow me to destroy me. It followed me because it was waiting for the right targets." She tightened her grip on his hand. "Tomorrow, I am walking into that courtroom, and I am going to let it loose on them." The next morning, July 14, 2026, Courtroom 4C of the federal courthouse was packed to maximum capacity. Reporters from the New York Times and the Star-Ledger shoved each other for seats in the gallery. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Arthur sat at the defense table, looking stoic, but feeling the crushing weight of impending doom. Next to him sat Mia. She was calm, adjusting her microphone, organizing her legal pads as if it were a routine contract dispute. On the opposite side, Richard Avery, the smug federal prosecutor, grinned as he adjusted his tie. Behind him sat Donald West, the traitor, flanked by 4 heavily armed federal marshals. Donald refused to look in Arthur's direction. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Carter, banged her gavel. "Case of United States versus Arthur Vance. Is the defense ready?" Mia stood up. Her voice rang out clear and precise. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." Mia Vance representing the defendant. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. The media began whispering furiously. His own adopted daughter, a rookie lawyer. It's a suicide mission. The prosecution's case was devastating. For 3 days, Avery presented financial records detailing millions of dollars laundered through shell companies registered in Delaware. He showed security footage of Arthur's associates at the docks, but the climax of the trial came on the 4th day, when the prosecution called Donald West to the stand. Donald took the oath, his voice raspy. He began to speak, laying out the inner workings of Arthur's organization with meticulous, terrifying detail. He testified about a night in October 2018, alleging that Arthur had personally ordered the execution of a rival Kappa regime at a seafood restaurant in Hoboken. Arthur sat perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask, but inside his soul was bleeding. Donald had been his brother in all but blood. The betrayal was a physical ache in his chest. "Your witness," Avery said, a triumphant smirk on his face as he sat down. He looked at Mia as if she were a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. Mia stood up. She smoothed the front of her blazer. She didn't look nervous. She looked entirely at peace, carrying herself with an eerie, quiet grace that made the entire courtroom grow completely silent. She walked toward the witness stand, stopping a few feet from Donald West. Donald finally looked at her, a patronizing, pitying smile on his lips. "Mr. West," Mia began, her voice soft, almost gentle. The drive back to the Eagle Rock estate was conducted in a suffocating, heavy silence. The rain had stopped, leaving New Jersey draped in a thick, gray fog that clung to the trees along Route 280. Outside, the world was spinning. News broadcasts on the radio of the armored Mercedes-Benz S-Class were already calling the Saddle River explosion the deadliest gangland hit in state history. The authorities were paralyzed. The hierarchy of the city's underworld had been decapitated in a single, fiery instant. Arthur stared out the tinted window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Beside him, Mia sat perfectly still. Her hands, clad in thin leather gloves, were folded neatly in her lap. She looked like a young associate reflecting on a successful day in corporate litigation, not a woman who had just unleashed a storm of biblical proportions. "Who are you?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of a sudden, terrifying realization. He didn't look at her. He was afraid of what he might see in her eyes. The girl eye raised. She loved Chopin. She spent her weekends volunteering at the shelter on Washington Street. She cried when a stray dog died. Mia didn't flinch. She turned her head, her gaze soft, almost pitying. "I am still that girl, Dad. I still love Chopin. But the stray dogs didn't murder my mother." The car pulled up the winding driveway of the estate. The security guards at the iron gates didn't look at Arthur with their usual disciplined deference. They looked at the vehicle with sheer, unadulterated dread. Word had traveled fast. The king was back, but he was no longer the most dangerous person in the house. Arthur walked into his study, his knees weak. The fire from the night before was nothing but cold, grey ash. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, his hand shaking so violently the amber liquid spilled over his knuckles. He didn't bother to wipe it. "Tell me how," Arthur commanded, turning to face her as she closed the heavy oak door behind her. "My intelligence network cost me $12 million a year. I had wiretaps, federal moles, corrupt cops on the payroll at the 2nd Precinct, and we found nothing. How did a 21-year-old law student orchestrate the destruction of the 2 most powerful syndicates in the state in 10 minutes? Mia walked over to the desk. She didn't sit down. Instead, she slowly removed her gloves, placing them neatly beside his glass. "You built your empire on fear, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet, devoid of anger. "You paid millions to men who only stayed loyal because they feared your gun or craved your money. But you forgot about the people who actually make this city run. The invisible ones." She looked out the window toward the sprawling gardens. The cleaning ladies who scrub the blood off the floors at the River Horse restaurant. The single mothers working the night shift as waitresses. The poor, desperate girls who marry Cole's soldiers just to have a roof over their heads, only to be beaten behind closed doors. You call them powerless. You don't even look them in the eye when they serve your coffee. Arthur felt a chill creep up his spine. "I didn't need millions," Mia continued, turning back to him. "I just needed to listen. I offered them what you never could: protection, dignity, and a way out. I built a network of the forgotten. It was a maid named Clara whose husband Cole's men threw off the docks, who planted the high-definition camera in that private dining room. It was a terrified, abused wife who gave me the access codes to the Saddle River compound. And it was a night-shift maintenance worker who turned the main gas valve and severed the backup lines. You used them," Arthur breathed, his chest heaving. "You put innocent people in danger. They chose this." Mia shot back, her eyes flashing with a sudden, brilliant heat. "They wanted justice, a concept you and Cole buried under decades of greed. I didn't force anyone. I just gave the cursed a voice." She walked closer, her eyes locking onto his. The silence in the room was deafening, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "But this was never just about Cole," she whispered. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. What is that supposed to mean? Mia reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out an old, yellowed document. It was a police report from October 12, 2011, the night Sarah died. For 15 years, you told me that Cole's men breached the estate and shot my mother, Mia said, her voice trembling now, the first crack in her flawless armor. You told me it was a tragic casualty of war. You made me believe my curse was what killed her. You let me carry that guilt every single day of my life, Arthur. I spent nights crying myself to sleep, wishing I had died in that diner instead of her. She slammed the report onto the mahogany desk. But 3 months ago, I found the original ballistics report from the Newark Police Department. The bullet that killed my mother didn't come from a Beretta or a Glock used by Cole's street thugs. It was a .38 caliber round fired from a custom Smith & Wesson Performance Center revolver. Arthur felt the room tilt. His hand went to his waistband, where empty space now resided. He had carried that exact custom revolver for 30 years. Donald West didn't just betray you 3 weeks ago, Dad, Mia whispered, the word Dad dripping with a sudden, agonizing irony. He betrayed you 15 years ago. He was working with Cole back then, too. He wanted to start a war to push you out. But he didn't shoot Sarah. He was too cowardly. She stepped so close he could smell the faint scent of jasmine on her skin, the same perfume her mother used to wear. The ballistics match your personal sidearm, Arthur, the gun you kept in the study drawer. You came home during the raid, panicked, and fired blindly into the dark kitchen. You killed her. You killed my mother. Arthur's breath hitched in his throat. He sank into his leather chair, the Scotch glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the hardwood floor. The amber liquid pooled around his expensive shoes, looking desperately like blood. He closed his eyes, the memory rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. The smoke, the shouting, the blinding flashes of gunfire. He had fired into the shadows near the pantry. He had heard a soft gasp, but when he found her, he convinced himself it was Cole's men. The roar of the .45 caliber Colt M911 didn't just fill the study. It shattered the very air. Time dilated, stretching the horrific fraction of a second into an agonizing lifetime. Mia watched, her breath completely abandoning her lungs, as Arthur's body violently jerked backward. The heavy hollow-point round tore through his tailored charcoal vest, striking him high in the right side of his chest. He didn't cry out. He simply folded, his knees buckling as he collapsed onto the $40,000 antique Tabriz rug. The deep crimson of his blood instantly began to bloom across the intricate silk threads, spreading as dark and unforgiving as the life he had led. No, Mia screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore her throat. She dropped to the floor, her hands frantically pressing against the gaping wound, her pristine leather gloves instantly turning slick and hot with his blood. Donald West stood in the shattered doorway, the smoking pistol trembling in his hand. A manic, broken laugh bubbled up from his throat. He stepped over the splintered oak of the doors, his eyes wide and completely hollow. "It's over," Donald spat, stepping forward and aiming the smoking barrel directly down at Mia's head. "Your little revolution ends right here, sweetheart. I'll tell the feds you shot him, and I took you out in self-defense." A tragic, bloody end to the cursed girl. Mia didn't cower. She didn't close her eyes. She glared up at him, her hands still desperately applying pressure to Arthur's fading heartbeat. If she was going to die tonight, she would die looking the devil in the eye. But the final shot never came. From the shadowed hallway behind Donald, a small, trembling figure emerged. It was Clara, the 55-year-old maid who dusted the bookshelves, the woman who had smuggled the camera into the River Horse restaurant, the widow of a murdered dockworker. She had spent 10 years emptying ashtrays, scrubbing mud from hardwood floors, and pretending she didn't hear the violence of the underworld. But tonight she wasn't invisible. Clara held a heavy, wrought-iron fire poker, one she had polished just that morning, gripped tightly in both her calloused hands. She didn't hesitate. With a feral cry fueled by years of silent suffering and explosive grief, Clara swung the heavy iron bar with every ounce of strength she possessed. The sickening crunch of metal striking bone echoed sharply through the study. The poker connected squarely with the base of Donald's skull. His eyes rolled back instantly, the gun slipping from his fingers as he crumpled to the hardwood floor like a puppet with its strings suddenly cut. He didn't twitch. Clara dropped the poker, her hands flying to her mouth as she began to sob uncontrollably, sliding down the doorframe until she hit the floor. Mia ignored the dead man. She leaned completely over Arthur. His face was entirely drained of color, his breathing shallow, wet and rattling. "Dad?" Mia sobbed, her tears freely falling now, mixing with the blood pooling on his chest. "Hold on, the ambulance is coming. I'll call them. Just hold on." Arthur reached up with a trembling, blood-soaked hand and gently cupped her cheek. His skin was already turning ice-cold. For the first time in his life, the impenetrable, terrifying mask of the ruthless mob boss was entirely gone. Beneath it was just Kang Dae-jung, the scared, desperate immigrant who had arrived in Newark in 1988 with $50 in his pocket, forced to become a monster just to survive the streets. "Mia," he wheezed, his voice barely a rasp. "The sirens. They're close. Don't speak. Save your strength," she pleaded, pressing her entire body weight onto the wound to staunch the bleeding. "I have to," Arthur choked out, coughing up a fine mist of crimson. "I have to tell you the truth. The real truth. Not the lie I told myself." Mia shook her head frantically. "It doesn't matter. You didn't mean to shoot her. I know you didn't mean to kill my mother. I forgive you." Arthur's eyes, milky and unfocused, suddenly sharpened with a piercing, agonizing clarity. "She wasn't your mother, Nae Tull," he whispered, using the Korean term of endearment he had kept locked away in his heart for 15 years. Mia froze. The blood roaring in her ears suddenly went completely silent. "What?" "The diner." "November 14, 2011, Arthur gasped, fighting a brutal war for every single syllable. It wasn't a coincidence. Donald and Cole, they knew my routines. They knew I went to the ironbound diner when I was stressed. Sarah wasn't running from loan sharks, Mia. She was a mule for Cole's syndicate. Arthur gripped her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong savings despite his fading life. They paid her $10,000 to play the desperate victim. The little girl, the bruises, the broken glass. It was all a theatrical performance. A honeypot to get inside my walls, to bypass my security. Mia's mind reeled, the world tilting violently on its axis. The entire foundation of her life, the deep trauma she had carried, the guilt of the curse that had consumed her identity, it was all disintegrating before her eyes. "But the raid," Mia stammered, her voice breaking into a terrified whisper. "You said you fired into the dark." "I lied," Arthur whispered, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye and tracking through the blood on his cheek. "When I breached the safe room that night, the heavy steel door was already open. Sarah wasn't hiding from Cole's men. She was working with them. She had a kitchen knife pressed tight to your throat. She was waiting for me. She was going to slaughter you right in front of me to break my mind." Mia let out a choked gasp, falling back on her heels, unable to breathe. "I didn't fire blindly, Mia," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a faint, desperate hum. "I looked the woman who raised you dead in the eyes, and I put a .38 caliber hollow point straight through her heart to save your life. But when I saw you sitting there on the floor, clutching that giant teddy bear, staring at her bleeding body, I saw your innocent soul shatter. You truly loved her." He reached out again, his bloody fingers gently brushing her long, dark hair. "If I told you she was a monster, if I told you she sold your tiny life for $10,000, it would have destroyed your ability to ever trust, to ever feel safe, to ever love. So I let you believe it was a tragic accident. I let you believe your curse killed her. I took the hatred, I took the blame, so you could keep the one pure memory you had of a mother's love." Mia collapsed over his chest, weeping with a profound, earth-shattering agony. In the end, Arthur's greatest victory wasn't the empire he built, but the daughter he saved. He wore the armor of a monster so she could grow up pure, proving that true love often hides in the darkest places. If this story of sacrifice and a father's ultimate devotion moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss another gripping story. Thank you for listening.